So we talked primarily last night about the function of virtue and how the question, why should you be moral, why should you be good, is resolved quite easily in Buddhism from a Buddhist point of view. And that is because it contributes to the development of the higher mind. You don't need any other reason external to that. You don't need to find that these are rules embedded in the universe or anything like that, or that they're from God, but all you need to know is they're useful. So it's pragmatic, it's useful to be virtuous. And it contributes towards this ultimate goal of freedom. The Buddha doesn't make any strong arguments beyond that. He doesn't generally he's not interested in arguing, actually. If he sees that the person can benefit by a few well-chosen stories or logical points, then he will undertake to converse with them. But not other than that. And of course, Buddhism doesn't have there's no strategy for converting others. There's no reliance, no necessity on your part. You will have good results if you practice, and to convince anybody else of it is not necessary part of that, which leaves you free to offer your own experience, the benefits, if you wish, whenever you wish, out of compassion, but no obligation. So this structure of behavior is primarily for the ultimate aim of liberation. It's also not to necessarily fix the world or bring justice to the world, or to prevent the various catastrophes and such that could happen. We're not really obliged to do that. It's essentially that the Buddha doesn't regard it as within the control or the possibilities of individuals to make that happen. So there's no obligation to make anything happen. To prevent evil is not something you can actually do, except insofar as your own behavior. And to make things safe and good and so forth is not necessarily within your possibilities, but it is possible that you may do this for yourself. If we get good results on the side, very good. But the Buddha doesn't lay a guilt trip on you. It's not that you must do these things, must fix the world. So it's very freeing. There are religious structures out there that just put you in this desperate state of having to save everybody or fix the world. It's very unfair, very unfortunate to put people in that position, since they really can't do it. It's frustrating. And the other version is that you can't do anything for yourself. Now it's a very interesting position of some religions, that you must save everybody else, but you can't save yourself. You're incapable, and only God or Jesus or somebody can do that for you. That's a terrible position to be in. So the Buddha is reversing that. He says you can't, even the Buddha is not going to fix everything. You can see the Buddha's come and gone and things are nicely broken. He never fixed it. So he was never here to fix it. But he said there will be benefits. There'll be many benefits, but I can't make that happen. I just think that some people will listen and it'll improve the quality of their existence. And the other thing he says is that nobody else is going to save you. Nothing is going to save you except yourself. You're going to do it only by skill and wisdom. And only you can do that. Nobody else can do that for you. And you can't do it for anybody else. So it's a very different version of things. So this virtue is, the idea is that it contributes to this endeavor on your part to move towards your own liberation from suffering. So this is where it underpins the three higher factors of the path, the last three factors: right effort, right mindfulness, and right samadhi. And why are they called right? In Pali it's samma, samma vayamo, samma sati, samma samadhi. Why does he put that prefix in there? Why does he add that? Why not just effort, mindfulness, concentration? And what's the difference between, the mindfulness is taught everywhere. Why is it not right mindfulness? People make effort all the time. They try to restrain themselves. They try to be good. Why is that not right effort? People concentrate. They even have ecstatic experiences. Why is that not necessarily right samadhi? Because all of those factors are only right in the context of the path, so that they're only right if they're leading to liberation. They're employed for liberation. The ends define whether it's right concentration or just concentration, right mindfulness or just mindfulness, right effort or just effort. And you could even be doing the same practice, the same mindfulness practice, but one of them is right mindfulness and the other one is just mindfulness, because the person is seeing it in the context of the goal, the ultimate goal towards liberation. And until that aspiration to liberation comes up, that context for Buddhist practice is not there. So that's something to get very straight, is that these factors are all just serving each other. They're interrelated with each other only in the context of moving towards that personal liberation, the liberation from the intrinsic causes of suffering. So this begins with right effort, and the efforts are obviously, well, not obvious maybe, but first of all, to commit to the idea that there is such a thing as effort. Not everybody accepts that. There's all kinds of ideas that you are predetermined. There is no possibility of making. You're all causally conditioned, absolutely conditioned, etc. So the Buddha rejects that. That was a discussion point at the time of the Buddha, and is a discussion point to this day. Is there free will or not? Is there the possibility of making effort or not? This was, of course, a topic that he talked about, and he's very clear. He says, I've laid down right effort, monks. Here are the factors of right effort. There are 4 factors under right effort, which I'll talk about later. But monks, make effort. I would not tell you to make effort if you could not make effort. But because you can make effort, so I say, monks, make effort. Now, that's not necessarily a philosophical argument, that's just an advocacy. He's wise enough, sharp enough to say, I don't have to justify these things through endless argument. The argument over predetermination versus free will is very, very old. And it's very hard to make a compelling argument in either direction. We all feel like we make decisions. We feel like we could have made a choice. And the idea that you couldn't never rings true to us intuitively. You can make logical arguments the other way, but usually they don't. You can't really feel authentic about such a thing. But there were sects of philosophers, wanderers, etc., that had the idea that none of what you are about to do is under your personal control. It's just unfolding, and it must unfold the way it does, and that there is no personal responsibility, etc. The Buddha very thoroughly and completely rejected that. But he's a psychologist, and he understands that the first thing you're going to encounter is that you do have conditions. You're not exactly free, and you can feel that. You make a decision to not do something, and then you do it. You make a decision to do something, then you don't do it. And you can feel the forces. You can feel the force of habit. You can feel your determinations ebbing away. Sometimes you pull it off, and then you're very convinced of your strength and your capacity to maintain a determination, and then just a while before that falls away. That's not pride, by the way. That's just, it's hard to completely know yourself, that's all. And the Buddha says, keep working at it, because eventually you will be able to pull it off. And that's the development, what we call the development of adhitthana, or determination, to make a resolution and carry it out. And that requires practice. There are people that have never made any determination whatsoever. They follow their impulses. They just follow it. Never occurs to them to wrestle with habit structures. So the Buddha is advocating it's actually a lot of effort, but it's not just any effort, it's skillful effort. So there are clumsy efforts, there are wrong efforts, and then there's skillful efforts. But he is very big on this, and Buddhism is exclusively about your own decision-making process and your investment in your own energy and effort. Other people outside you can help in the sense that they can give you advice and they can give you examples and encourage you, which is great and very, very important, very helpful. But there is no mystical deity there that will interfere with your decision-making process, that will relieve you of the burden of this. It won't happen that way. So, these efforts are going to are basically going to be carried out by mindfulness. The function of mindfulness is going to carry out these efforts, and the primary function of mindfulness is as an observer to know when wrong effort's being made and when right effort is being made. So that's the function of mindfulness. In itself, it has some power in itself, but not complete power. It requires pulling in other factors in order to carry out its instructions. The instructions under right effort are to prevent the arising of unwholesome conditions. I mean, prevention's always the easiest way, isn't it? Stop it before it starts. And if you can't, then you have to remove it. So if negative stuff starts, then you have to remove it. Those are under right effort. Right effort is one of the least taught aspects of the path, and there's good reason for it. In general out there, first of all, many of the teachings and even so-called Buddhist teachings, but often on meditation and mindfulness, are not really about right mindfulness. And they're not right because they're not actually aiming for this ultimate liberation. And there's a lot of skipping over right effort because it's so explicit in there about right effort. It is really not just being aware of the situation. It is a very deliberate interference with the situation. And there's cultural reasons why that is skipped over. One, sometimes teachers are just not aware of it. They've never actually read the Eightfold Path with the drop-down menus. They just saw the headings, right effort. What's that supposed to be? There is a drop-down menu under that. Push that, the drop-down, and it gives you details. And the details are a little bit maybe startling. What the Buddha is actually asking you to do. Because in some sort of ways, it contradicts the general tone of our time. Tone of our time is set by psychology in the late 19th century, early 20th century, up to now. Psychology is setting the tone of our time about how the mind works and what you're supposed to be doing. Religion itself, is Western religion, Christianity, so forth, is not setting the tone about how you would deal with your mind anymore. Because it's actually, it's in fairly strong contradiction to psychology, modern psychology, psychology of the last 150 years. And you can see the plain friction between what the Pope says and what Freud says. So you've got a split, whether you know it or not. You're living in a culture that is split, and you're getting advice, remnant advice from the Christian culture for 2,000 years, and then an interruption of that from the 19th century on, and at plain odds with each other. They completely are at odds with what human nature is, what your aspiration is, what you could do, what you can't do. So no wonder there's a bit of confusion in this society about things. And also so I just explained the difference, the attitudes of Christianity, where salvation is through Jesus or some sort of intervention, or you can't do certain things, versus Buddhism, which rejects that and says, nobody's going to do anything for you except you. It's all up to you. So you got to see that there's strong polarities there. What's the contradiction between Buddhism and sort of modern, just standard psychology is? Standard psychology doesn't have any idea of supernormal aspirations. It is trying to make you functional and get along all right. It never even considers the possibility that you could actually go beyond anger or desire. You won't get that advice from your psychologist. It's normative. It's just in the normal sort of realm. It's because the roots of it are from normal people who lived functional lives, not particularly successful, not particularly psychologically well. The founders of psychology are just find me one that is truly well. They're not well, and they don't know how to get well, but they do have advice for people who are extremely dysfunctional about how they might become functional, but beyond that, nothing. So you're going to get contradictions about methods for dealing with your mind. So the Buddha is advocating some cleansing of the mind, which is not advocated in normal life, and the ridding of the five hindrances. So the prevention and the removal, the right effort, is about the five hindrances, which is just a nice handful of basically all of the problematic nature of the emotional structure of the mind. It never occurs to ordinary people that is something that they're ever going to do in life. They might need to reduce anger when it spills out and they have domestic violence and they end up in jail and all this kind of stuff. Yes, you got a problem with anger, so the idea of reducing that. Maybe give them a pill or something, some tranquilizers or a few words of advice. So this is actually the aspiration to free yourself entirely from this. And that means prevention and removal. And it doesn't mean just awareness. And here's another friction with standard psychological talk. There's a couple of words that have just entered the language and entered the view, and it's called suppression and repression. You will not find that in Buddhism. It's an invention. And it's an invention that's not very old. Suppression and repression. And there's holes in that theory about suppression and repression that you could drive a truck through. It is not scientific, it's not rational, it's vague assertions that cannot stand up to deep scrutiny. And so the Buddha is not particularly worried about you kind of bypassing something you need to look at, or that you're covering over something that you need, that you're not conscious of, but it's being covered over, and this and that. That's not how the Buddha views the mind, and not how the Buddha views the method for moving along. He's very big on installing new pathways. So creating alternative pathways, and that's not called repression or suppression. The pathways that you normally go down are just habitual, and they're basic things that you picked up when you were a kid or whatever. You're not repressing them by choosing to go down another way. You're not looking at them, etc. You're not suppressing them either. They only have a certain kind of sustainability when they're used. And when you don't use them, each time you don't use them, you make an effort, and it might be a very strong effort at first to not go there, because it's the familiar, it's the sense of who you are. If you don't go down that pathway, the very first time you do that, first of all, you realize that you can do that. You can not be that person that you thought you were. And that's a startling realization, that you're not a thing, that you're not solid, and that there are options, and that you're not being inauthentic by deciding not to repeat habitual impulses. We talk about being natural. It's not natural. It's just you've rehearsed it so many times. It's just habit structures. It feels natural, but it's not you, and it's not authentic. It's just been repeated. That's all. It's repetition. It's no more real or true or authentic than anything else, but it's just easy because it's being repeated. So it's very easy to suffer and do unskillful things not because it's you or authentic or anything else, and when you decide not to do that, it's not being inauthentic or anything. It's simply just redoing a habit, that's all. And the other one will die out. It will die out without use. It will become weaker without use. It doesn't just sit there eternally. It's not nuclear. It's just a wood fire, it'll die out. There isn't anything eternal, so it's structures that are repeated, and some of them are biologically sort of based and so forth. Doesn't matter. You can undo those things. And you can undo them. There's nothing sacred about biological impulses. Nothing. And if you want to, in fact, it's called being normal. And the Buddha doesn't think that's a good idea. Buddha is very much for not being normal. And not being natural either. He's very much for being supernormal and supernatural. Above normal and above nature. And you're the animal that can do it. The other ones, not so much. You, the humans, yes, you can be supernormal and supernatural. So we're not denying any of these you're not born with as a blank slate. You have biological stuff, but there's other apparatus in there that can actually transcend that. And so that's what we're after ultimately, we're not doing normative psychology, and we're not trying to be natural, etc. It's training to be above nature. Will that result in some sort of problems? No, the Buddha is not interested in increasing your problems. It's going to solve a lot of problems. Will there be repercussions because you haven't properly dealt with something or something like that? No, the Buddha is not interested in your personal history or any of those things. There are other techniques for processing all this stuff that happens to people in life. It's not like this is the first generation that stuff happened to. In a much more intense way, you can imagine in the 5th century BC, the amount of child death and starvation and just amazing things are rampant at that time. And people are shocked and put into all kinds of situations through events in their lives, but they're getting over it through a different technique, and it's not required to go sort of explore it, etc. So this is a completely different psychology from that. It's very important that this kind of message gets out, that your mind is filled with this stuff from all kinds of educational structures, magazine articles, and et cetera, et cetera. And we have to really stand out, be aware that we're in a culture, and that some of the general information, the general attitudes in the culture have to be separated out from what the core essential teachings of the Buddha, the eightfold path is. And in order to do that, you have to actually take some risks and experiment with that. So this is what you're endeavoring in meditation retreats and your practice at home, is that to engage in right effort and just give it a shot. It's kind of fresh to come to it that way. And that is the very determination to start the day by just a determination not to fall into these the hindrances. And you all know the hindrances, aversion, the two strongest and most important ones: desire, aversion. Against the world, towards the world. And the world might include yourself, against yourself and for yourself. These powerful polarity. This is the biggest problems in your life, are those. The next duality is also problematic, but not as problematic. And that's just excessive energy or agitation and the depletion of that stagnation, including depressed feelings and so forth, lack of energy. That's the next polarity. In exaggerated form, manic depressive kind of thing. Everybody's a little manic depressive. Ordinary people are up and down. Sometimes on the agitated side, and sometimes on the stagnant side. And then the last one, which is a little world in itself, is just doubt. Inability to make a decision, feeling paralyzed at the crossroads, not knowing which way to go, and a kind of an uncomfortable pressure to have to make a decision, and you don't know what to do. These are the primary categories of distress, problems. And those are what right effort is referring to as to prevent and to remove. Prevent and remove, prevent and remove. Prevention is preferred. If you don't catch it in time, removal. And the other two categories for right effort is actually, I would say, it would be better, I'm sure the Buddha just put it as two because it's just more symmetrical, but there's actually three sort of. One is planting. Like there are, and this is to do with the wholesome side of things, the beautiful and the positive emotional structures and mental structures. And so some of them you don't have them, so you're going to have to plant them. They're like seeds, you're going to have to initiate them. But some of the have been planted, you have them, and they're going to have to be maintained. And then the third part of it is abundance, and not just maintaining good things that you have found within yourself, but to actually deepen them and cause them to become abundant. So planting, maintenance, and increase is really the right efforts, the two positive right efforts. And that's basically summarized as the 7 factors of enlightenment. And a preoccupation with that, those beautiful, liberating factors. That's what you're really, when you wake up in the morning, that's what your job is gardening all day long in that, amongst the beautiful, positive, and weeding and preventing the weeds. So this is an ongoing process. That's Buddhist psychology. That's what the basics of it is. Very straightforward, very simple. A lot of the elaborate theories of psychology just are completely bypassed in this, that you will not find a reference to it, and what is regarded as dangerous or superficial or something is absolutely set aside and shown to be psychology. Modern psychology in general is shown to be inadequate in these areas because you get good results with people. And if you can't get good results from your theory, then maybe your theory is wrong. So this theory gets good results and is demonstrated again and again to work. But of course not if we don't do it. So you have to take a shot at it. Try these techniques. So that is, I seem to have spent all my time on the first factor, so we'll get on to the others later.